Thank you for joining us. My name is Dinsha Mistry. I'm a research fellow here at the Hoover Institution. On behalf of the Huntington Program on Strengthening U.S.-India Relations, I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our discussion this evening on the implications of the 2008 U.S.-India Civ-Nuke Agreement, perhaps the most important deal between our two countries. I would even go so far as to argue one of the most important deals, at least on the U.S. side, of the 21st century. But I'm a little biased, of course. Before we do get into it, we've got a small video montage for you, a preview to warm up the crowd. And after that, I'll pass it over to Anya Manuel. I'm only going to introduce her. She will introduce the rest of this august panel. Anya is a former diplomat, author, and advisor on foreign policy. She's a co-founder and partner at Rice, Hadley, Gates, and Manuel LLC, which is a strategic consulting firm that helps U.S. companies navigate international markets. Anya is a keen and avid India follower. She's recently written This Brave New World, India, China, and the U.S. She's a Stanford grad, I would also add. And most relevant for this conversation, she served as special assistant to the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Nicholas Burns, who was in charge of Asia policy at this time during the deal. With that, let's cue up the video and we'll kick off this wonderful session. Thank you.
The U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Agreement of 2008 was one of the most important diplomatic achievements by the United States since World War II, and certainly the most consequential between the U.S. and India in their shared history. The establishment of this agreement is a story of ambition, resilience, and diplomacy that reshaped the fabric of international relations between the United States, India, and the world's established nuclear powers. In May 1974, India conducted its inaugural nuclear explosion, Operation Smiling Buddha. This bold move drew a line in the sand, resulting in severe sanctions from the United States and a global community wary of nuclear proliferation. In 1998, India's nuclear ambitions reemerged with further nuclear weapons testing, creating waves of international tension and further threatening India's standing in the international community. U.S. President George W. Bush and Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh saw an opportunity to turn the tides. Together, they envisioned a partnership where India's civil and military nuclear facilities would be distinctly separated, with the former under international supervision, in exchange for the lifting of U.S. sanctions and the promise of civil nuclear cooperation. The stakes for this deal could not have been higher for both countries. India's ambitions were to emerge from economic stagnation to become a major and modern economic power. With a population of over 1 billion people, India would require a tremendous amount of energy for decades to fuel its economic growth, and that energy source would need to be a clean fuel. Expanding the civil nuclear sector would require fuel and technology from foreign suppliers. This required a special exception from the United States and other nuclear powers, largely because India did not sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1974. The United States wanted India to become a major regional power and engage in a strategic partnership with this large, dynamic, and vibrant democracy. The United States and India shared many of the same values, and so it made sense for the U.S. to support the growth of an emerging economic power through responsible nuclear energy. The path to this agreement was anything but simple. U.S. non-proliferation laws and treaties would have to be amended, and approvals would have to be given by both sides as well as international bodies. It was a journey marked by intricate diplomacy and complex legislative steps led by U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs Nicholas Burns, U.S. Ambassador to India David Mulford, Indian Foreign Minister Pranab Mukherjee, Joint Secretary Subramanyam Jaishankar, and others. It would take over 3 years from start to finish. Negotiations started in July 2005, when President George W. Bush and Prime Minister Singh introduced a framework for nuclear cooperation. After 3 years, on the 8th of October 2008, President George W. Bush signed the agreement into law, followed by the ratification of the agreement by Secretary Rice and her counterpart Pranab Mukherjee. This event recognized India's nuclear status and set the stage for its emergence as a global power. This agreement was the cornerstone of a new era of strategic cooperation between the U.S. and India, establishing a base of trust to address shared emerging challenges, including security and stability in the Asia-Pacific. While the civil nuclear deal was indeed about partnering with India on its energy needs, it set the two countries on a path towards strategic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific across several areas of cooperation, including defense, enabling our two countries to work together to offset the rising Chinese influence while maintaining shared and balanced power in the region. This is the story of the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Agreement, a defining moment in the annals of international diplomacy and a beacon of what is possible when nations come together for the greater good.
Thank you all, and welcome to this conference on the U.S.-India Civilian Nuclear Deal. A few of us have had a chance to talk behind the scenes and to really have a reunion of sorts, because it's been described as historic, it's been described as landmark. It was also difficult work. And I think the people, the senior officials, the more junior staffers that did all this work behind the scenes got to know each other as a result and got to really trust each other. And so I'm very lucky today to start with this august and large panel to talk to us and understand really why the two countries did the nuclear deal, what it was designed to do, and the cooperation it's unlocked. Let me just start with 2 points. One, it is hard to overstate how much distrust there was between US-India relations before we did this. So now in retrospect, when you have big achievements in diplomacy, it always feels like, well, it was inevitable. Well, none of that was inevitable when the Bush administration and the government of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh in India decided to upend decades of nuclear policy. And this deal unlocked an enormous amount of cooperation, not just in energy, but in defense, in intelligence, all of things we'll talk about. We're going to do this, I'm going to introduce the panel, and then we're going to divide this really into 3 subsections. One, to talk about why the two countries decided to do this and what their goals were. 2, the negotiations themselves and the obstacles that were overcome to get to the deal. And then finally, really, what is going on now and what kind of cooperation has it unlocked? So I will not read all of your distinguished bios. You have some very august people here on stage, and Nick Burns joining us direct from Beijing. But of course you have Condoleezza Rice, the director of the Hoover Institution, and during the Bush administration, Secretary of State, so really leading these efforts, and before that, National Security Advisor. You have Governor M.K. Narayanan, who of course was National Security Advisor of India from 2005 to 2009, and then also served as governor of West Bengal, along with many, many other public service posts. You have Shiv Shankar Menon, who at first was, during the relevant time period, Foreign Secretary of India, and then the National Security Advisor from 2010 to 2014. You have Ambassador Mulford, who's really in large part responsible for this great India program we have here at Hoover, and who was the United States ambassador to India during the relevant times. You have, I think we have Nick Burns above us. We have in person, all the way from Delhi with us, Ambassador Eric Garcetti, who's our current US ambassador to India, a great Californian, of course, former mayor of Los Angeles. So without further ado, let's get started. Condi, if I can toss the first question to you. Why did President Bush and you and Phil Zelikow and the people who were advising him decide to pursue a civil nuclear deal with India?
Well, I'll never forget the first glimpse of this. I had gone to brief then Governor Bush about what he might think about in foreign policy as he was running for office. And he asked me very bluntly, why don't we have a better relationship with India? And I started to explain, well, there had been this nuclear test in '74 and then '98. And as I was going through all of this, he sort of said, why don't we have a better relationship with India? And I really did, at that point, understand that from his point of view, this made perfectly good sense because this was the world's largest democracy. It was a democracy in which 1 billion plus people voted peacefully and were able to have consistent elections and overturn power peacefully. It was a potentially strategic partner, and his take on it was, he was in Austin, Texas. The Indian diaspora was fueling the knowledge revolution in the United States. So why didn't we have a better relationship with India? And we set about at that time, Nick Burns, who was at the time the Undersecretary for Policy, but also already at the White House before I left as National Security Advisor, to start steps toward improving the relationship with India, with the goal eventually of being able to get a civil nuclear deal that would remove 28 restrictions on India that had been there since 1974 and 1998. India was actually on something called the Entities List, along with such responsible powers as North Korea and Iran. And so we felt that we really needed to change the nuclear picture in order to unleash what should have been a strategic relationship between the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy.
Thank you. Connie, I'm just going to ask one quick follow-up, and that India-U.S. relations wasn't the only thing on at President Bush's plate. How did this fit in, after 9/11, serious issues and problems with Pakistan, everything going on in the Middle East? How did this fit in with the larger U.S. foreign policy goals?
Well, as hard as it was, it also was a positive step for the future. And when you're dealing with the world that we were dealing with post 9/11, it was really great, actually, to be working with a democracy where there was a future of a strategic relationship that looked incredibly promising. And even though we knew it was going to be very, very difficult, and I should just mention, others may mention this, but it wasn't just the negotiations with India. You also had to bring the rest of the world along because India was outside of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and so there were lots of countries that didn't want this to happen. You also had to bring along the Congress. We actually had to have a change in U.S. law in order to make this possible. But, when you're dealing with Afghanistan and Pakistan and 9/11, India's kind of a good thing to get up and work on in the morning. And so it was great to have something that was so positive, or potentially so positive.
Thank you. Governor Narayanan, and I want to turn to you, because you were there really at the inception of the deal, almost, I think, until the very end. The deal really started with President Bush and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. What was India's rationale for exploring the deal? And what did you want to achieve?
We had, for the first time, we had a prime minister who was an economist of that stature. So his worry was, how do I improve India's economic, what should I say, dimension? And he realized that energy was the key to this. So whenever people talk, they ask me what has happened on day one. Day one belonged to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and President Bush. They met in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. And Mr. Manmohan Singh he's a man of few words. He had only one question, saying, President Bush said, what can I do for you? He said, we have a problem with energy. And he said that the cost of every barrel is going up almost day by the day. So we have a fairly strong nuclear energy establishment. If you can help us overcome the many embargoes that had been put on us, that would help us. He had a very, very limited request. What finally transformed is totally different. I mean, it became the bedrock of India-US relations, something which I think has never happened before, at least in recent centuries. So the answer to your question, that I would say, is Mr. Manmohan Singh wanted President Bush to lift some of the embargoes that had been placed on India. The nuclear apartheid that we were facing at that point, we lifted. As I said, There are many other things, but I'll rest my case at this point.
Thank you. Shankar Menon, you were there first as Foreign Secretary, then as National Security Advisor of India. Can I turn to you the question I just asked to Condi? How did this fit in with India's other foreign policy priorities at the time? And we've heard about the domestic reasons for doing it, but how did it fit in with your foreign policy? Or how did it complicate your foreign policy?
It was more than that. It actually fit in with India's basic strategic positioning and goals, because what's the purpose of Indian foreign policy? To help transform India into a modern, prosperous, secure country, right? There's no way that we can do that if we have an indifferent relationship with the US, or just a sort of modus vivendi where we somehow or the other get along. So there is an Indian strategic interest in having a good, solid relationship with the US. And frankly, the Indian people understood this, I think, long before the politicians did in India. They sell real estate in Gurgaon outside Delhi by calling it Palm Springs. Ghasseti will tell you. It tells you something about what an aspirational young people, how they look at the US and at the relationship. And frankly, that helped us to go through the difficult periods when we were negotiating. Because it wasn't easy, as you said. It was a complex thing, and nobody had ever tried this before. But I think that's what actually drove it, that basic strategic congruence. And you've seen that work out in various fields. Initially in the Indo-Pacific, but today if you look at it, whether it's West Asia, whether it's Africa, whether it's new domains, you look at what we're doing today in defense and security and intelligence, I mean, across the board. And we share partners and friends and have a level of interoperability and understanding which I think would have been impossible without the civil nuclear deal.
Thank you.
A lot of our preparation for the deal, actually, I remember spending hours and hours with Nick in various places, in 7 hours in Madrid, I remember, discussing the shape of the world and what we could be doing and how we saw things. And it was really useful, because you needed to get on one page and understand the world similarly. And we were amazed at how similarly we looked at things without ever having talked about it before.
Yeah, it is so interesting, especially to all the students in the audience. You have all these theories of international relations. Sometimes just getting the bureaucracies to talk to each other and to trust each other is a very important component. And a key part of that component, really the hinge, if you will, were you, Ambassador Mulford. You were in Delhi at the time, during the entire time of this agreement. Can you say a little bit about the role you played kind of as the hinge of civility, of
Nick is on.
Oh, Nick is on.
Yeah.
Nick, we're happy to see you. You've appeared on screen. Thank you. I'll turn to you with the next question. Ambassador Mulford.
Well, I had a rather long experience with India that went back at least 10 or 12 years before I was ambassador. I was in the investment banking business. And there's some important points about India and the things that were impacting this situation before we did the civil nuclear deal. And that was that there was a history of rising relationships in India that went on for years among private sector people. And many, many Indian students went to American universities, something like 200,000 when I was there. And that is all part of the background, because when we began this initiative, as Secretary Rice has said, the governments were well behind the private societies and their relationships, lots of Indians living in the United States. And I always said there was a simple factor at work between our countries, and that is that Indians and Americans like each other, get along. And that was true before we formalized this effort. So that's an important thing to remember. Then you need also to remember that when sanctions were imposed, when India tested a nuclear weapon in 1998, Sanctions were imposed on India that were resented and painful for its economy and humiliating for its leadership position in the world. And this action, which was repealed right after 9/11 by President Bush, but operated for a time, set back our relationship considerably in defense, for example, and in other areas. And the civil nuclear issue, which came just as we were finishing this NSSP initiative, which was aimed at reducing the regulatory barriers in trade on sensitive technology issues between the United States and India. And we'd been negotiating that successfully for a year, and they were almost entirely removed in that period. So the stage was set for a new initiative. I became ambassador in that period, and it was remarkable how accurate President Bush's statement was about our relationship with India and why it was important to America, as quoted by Secretary Rice a few minutes ago. So that quickly transformed the situation in terms of trust, confidence. You don't do a deal like this with somebody you don't trust. That's vital, essential in the nuclear area. And so these first steps were very significant. And one of the reasons this get-together is so interesting for people like me is that we're all friends, very good friends, who negotiated as hard as we could for what we were doing. But it was like a reunion to meet again today after these years, and not like some formal meeting. So those are essential features of the Indian relationship. And I like to mention, any place where there's students, that many Indian students came to America, and when they came back, I tried to interview as many of them as I could. And I always asked the same question. What did you like best about your experience at an American university? And the answer was almost uniform. I liked it because I could pick my own courses. That's a very significant statement. And so that was operating too. And then I would say, well, there might be 50 Indian students in Moscow, but I doubt if they're happy.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to Nick Burns, who's now joined us. He's, of course, one of America's most distinguished diplomats, currently serving as our U.S. ambassador to Beijing, but during this relevant time was Undersecretary for Political Affairs. And for those of you all who don't know and who heard Dinch's nice introduction of me, if you were in the United States government, the longer your title, the more lowly your position. So I was Nick's staffer and lucky to do that. And Nick, you can't see everyone in the audience, but you have a lot of friends here, from Alyssa Ayers to Gayatri Kumar to Atul Keshup to Jonah to Phil Zelikow, really just a lot of friends of India and India-US relations. You were so instrumental in all of the different pieces of the India-US deal, from the separation agreement to the 123 agreement negotiations, the shepherding India through the IAEA safeguards, the nuclear suppliers group. Can you give us a little bit of a sense of how you approached that and how you got all of the different stakeholders on side? It's a small question.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's nice to be with everybody. I wish I could be at Hoover. It's such a beautiful and great place, at Stanford, but I've got a few things on my plate here, as you can imagine, in China. Just a couple of thoughts, Anya, that largely coincide with what's already been said. I can't give enough credit to President George W. Bush and to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. They made a big strategic bet in 2004, 5, 6, 7, and 8 that we needed a much better, deeper, larger strategic relationship with India. And the route to it was the Civil Nuclear Agreement, the 3 sub-agreements that you talked about, Anya, that resulted in this great success in 2008. They had the insight that the rise of India as a global power, not just in South Asia, but around the world, was very much in the long-term strategic interests of the United States. And so they took on one of the hardest questions, India's status, or lack thereof, I should say, as a nuclear weapons power, and they succeeded. And so I want to give both of them credit because they deserve it. They were our leaders. And in particular, I just want to say about Condi, she and I had worked at the White House together at the National Security Council, along with Philip Zelikow, who's there this evening. And Condi and I were the 2-person Soviet team working for another President Bush, President George H.W. Bush, at the end of the Cold War. And I just had so much respect for her then, for the contribution she made then, but she made this happen. It was her strategic overview of this agreement, her tactical interventions. Our offices were very close together on the 7th floor of the State Department. We spent hundreds of hours together, and I just wanted to salute her for this achievement. I think people should applaud our Secretary of State. And I'd say very briefly, Anya, that bet paid off, particularly with the benefit of hindsight. Here we are 15 years later, and India and the United States have important relationships with China, where I serve today, but difficult. In our case, contentious, competitive relationship with China. And the fact that we now have India as a Quad partner, and that's the decision that every administration since President George W. Bush has made, Republican and Democrat, which is a great strength. The fact that we have such a close strategic military and economic partnership with India, I can't tell you how important that is for stability in the Indo-Pacific, where I am now. So thank you to the framers. The other advantage here, Anya, is that the Non-Proliferation Treaty, of course, was so important. It was the bedrock of nuclear stability from 1968 on. We sought to modernize that treaty. India had been on the outside looking in. It was a pariah state. There were a lot of reasons for that, but after 30 years of sanctions, it clearly wasn't working. And our view was that the NPT would actually be strengthened if India was allowed to participate and submit to IAEA safeguards on 14 of its 22 nuclear plants, because that would be a message to the proliferators of the world, to North Korea and to Pakistan in particular, that if you played by the rules, and India, ironically, was playing by the rules, it was not proliferating its nuclear technology, then there would be rewards in the international system. I think that, with the benefit of hindsight, was an advantage of this negotiation. So we were strategically minded, Anya, as you will remember, and I really value what you did, what Alyssa Ayers did. I know she's in the audience, what my good friend, longtime friend, Philip Zelikow did as one of the creators of the idea. In government, this was a team sport. And this was a great team headed by Condoleezza Rice. So President Kennedy famously said, victory has 1,000 fathers. We'll modernize him and say 1,000 fathers and mothers.
Thank you, Nick. That's great. So this is the part of the panel where we go behind the curtain, where you can be a little bit gossipy. and anybody can answer this. I want to throw it open to all of you. Give us some of the key moments that stand out for you that made the deal succeed.
I think the first key moment was when we moved from merely asking for extra nuclear energy to widening the scope of the discussion. I think that happened, I would say, in some ways due to the encouragement with the American side. Manmohan Singh, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, requested for help to improve our energy problem. By the time we started talking, they suddenly realized there was an opportunity to expand the scope of the entire. I mean, it's fundamentally different from what we started with. And what we got at the end, and once again I've joined the rest of the people here to compliment the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, for the role that she played, first as National Security Advisor. And so essentially the whole deal was expanded from merely energy to a whole range of other issues. And I think President Bush was the person who really pushed it forward, because my counterpart at the time was Stephen Hadley. And every time he met with the president would say, well, how are you doing with the Indians? How are things going? And he would say, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh is a good man. I've given him a commitment that I will help. So whatever they want, they can be done. And so we took full advantage of that to expand the entire scope of the relationship. And I think what I would say, the vision of the Americans, even more than the vision of the Indians, really drove the deal. I mean, it completely transformed the nature of the relationship. We never expected to reach that. I know that aspirational India, the students who came from India wished to do the following. But at that time, I don't think the government of India really hoped even to achieve that situation. And I think that is the Oppenheimer moment as far as we were concerned. But we were not talking of the nuclear bomb. We were talking of nuclear energy, but it became totally different from what we originally started with.
That's a perfect place to start. Thank you. And I don't know, Condi or David, if you want to chime in with, when did you decide from the American side that it was going to be broader and come up with the idea of the separation plan? And what was the germ here? Because this is really creative diplomacy. This doesn't happen all the time.
Right. Well, and also I'm going to tell one other little story, but I do think that it was, for President Bush, this was instrumental to something else, which is that India had to have its rightful place in the world, and therefore its rightful place with the United States. And we couldn't do that. Phil Zelikow said something at a meeting we were at recently when he said, everybody had talked about a better relationship with India, a better relationship with India. It had been going on for quite some time. But until you removed this restriction, you couldn't have a better relationship. And I think it was that decision that we were going to have to get that done somehow, no matter how hard it is. And look, it almost stalled several times. And when it would stall, one or the other side would find some way to push it forward. Sometimes it was the Indians who pushed it forward. We thought it had come to a dead end, and all of a sudden it would get pushed forward. And I will say there was one evening, so the Prime Minister had arrived for the meeting with President Bush, in which they were to announce that this would take place in July of 2005, that there would be a framework agreement. And Nick came to my office at about 7:30 that night. They were supposed to have the press avail at 9 o'clock the next morning. Nick said, I think we need more time. This isn't going to get done before tomorrow morning. And so I said to Nick,
At 9 p.m.
This is right. It's at 9 a.m. We were supposed to do it. About 7:30 that night, Nick told me it wasn't going to get done. And he said, I think he was not angry. He was not despondent. He just thought, we need more time. And so I went home, I went to bed, and I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, we don't have more time. And so I called Nick, and I said, Nick, call the Indians and tell them I'll be at the Prime Minister's hotel at 7:30 in the morning.
The Prime Minister had said that I won't meet anybody.
He said, I can't meet anybody. And I said, Nick, tell them I'll be there. If they don't want to meet me, that's okay, but I will be there. And so I showed up at the Willard. And the Prime Minister luckily let me in.
The Prime Minister was getting his turban ready by the time.
Was his turban on? Yeah,
it was
exactly.
Slightly rude, I don't know, American thing to do, but he was wonderful. He was not angry. He didn't put me off. He welcomed me in, and I think we solved, and Natwat Singh, who was the foreign minister, outstanding man, we solved the one little piece, and then I left, and I went back to the Oval Office, and the president said, so are we on? And I said, well, we'll see if they show up. And sure enough, at 9 o'clock, the Prime Minister walked in and the deal was done. So we all had to push a little hard at some times. Yes.
Does anyone else want to add a story? That's a great, yeah.
Well, there was another pause, which was very alarming and depressing when it took place, because it was in October of 2007, and the schedule for completing this deal was shrinking because the Congress had a shrinking ability to deal with this kind of problem. There was an announcement by the Prime Minister and Sonia Gandhi that it was more important for the Indian government to complete its term in office as a united cabinet, that would have been 2009, than it was to make operational the civil nuclear agreement with the United States. So this was a real downer at that point. And it lasted for something like 7 to 8 months, where there was no clear movement forward. And when we were approaching the G7 ministerial head of state summit in Tokyo that year, I decided I would go and call on the Prime Minister, and I asked him for a one-on-one meeting, which he agreed to. And we met in the last week of June, and I outlined to him how important it was for India to complete its side of this transaction or agreement, so that that would be in place, even if the Congress, with its limited schedule for processing business still intact, was unable to finish its side of the deal, because it might be a basis for the civil nuclear deal done by India, all conditions fulfilled, and actions by the other countries that had to take actions, like the Nuclear Suppliers Group, so that the deal might not die. It might survive into a new administration or be dealt with suddenly in a lame duck Congress after the US presidential election. He listened, as he always did, but didn't say anything. And he then said one more thing before the meeting ended. He said, "I hate to have to go to Tokyo to the summit and disappoint President Bush after all he's done for us." So that was the end of our meeting. 3 or 4 days later, 5 days later maybe, from the airplane flying to Tokyo with the Indian delegation to the G7 summit, he announced that the Indian government was going to go forward and make this deal operational, which was the signal for the rest of the story, which was difficult and took time, and we can talk about that, but it was the essential moment, the last moment, that this deal could have been processed by the United States Congress and the other countries that needed to process it.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Anya, could I add a detail to Secretary Rice's great story? And that shows you a lot about the fact that she's indefatigable. She didn't want to give up. We negotiated, this is July 18th, 2005. Prime Minister Singh was arriving for a state visit. And after Condi's early morning with the Prime Minister, we actually worked, Condi and Steve Hadley and I, with Ambassador Sham Saran and with MK Narayanan on a text, because we were producing a joint statement in the English language. And for 3.5 hours, we noodled over whether we should have a definite article or an indefinite article. I'm not trying to remember the noun now. But at some point, you could see from the Roosevelt room, the door to the Oval Office, where President Bush and Prime Minister Singh were meeting privately. And at one point, I said to Sham at about 10:59, before an 11 a.m. meeting, "Sham, the door's going to open in the Oval Office. We need an answer." The door opened, and he said yes. And so, sometimes negotiations come down to very minor negotiating details. but the definite or indefinite article made a big difference, both sides. And knowing a little bit about the English language for all of us, and we had the advantage that both of us did, was the key that day.
That's very helpful. Shankar, do you want to add something?
Well, for me, the real moment was when, as Ambassador Mulford said, when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh made it clear to his colleagues that he was willing to stake the fate of his government on this. And that, I think, was a decisive moment, because just before that, I think we had been really nervous about whether this would go through. We were thinking of contingencies, how to minimize the damage, etc. But he was steadfast right through. So, and the reason he was steadfast, I think, was also because of his confidence in President Bush.
Yeah.
And I think that was mutual.
It's totally mutual. That's the point.
And that's
the president
the key.
had great
That's the
confidence
key
in
here.
Prime
And where
Minister as well.
actual personalities matter. Yeah, it's not just interest. Let me let me follow up from there and maybe back up a little bit, because it's hard for an American audience to understand just how much domestic opposition there was to this deal in India. So maybe Governor Narayanan or Shankar, you want to say a little bit about that. Who was opposed and why, and how did you get through it?
Okay. You're playing by Chatham House rules or?
No, we're on the record, I think. We're being recorded. Yeah. But you can be honest anyway.
It's all right. It's
they're all
15 years.
No, I mean, if there was one person, or I would say there are two people who want the deal, irrespective of all things. As Nick mentioned a few minutes ago, we finished at 59 that day. It's true that we were fighting over articles and A and D and whatnot, but then when the president came to India in 2006, he stepped off the plane, and some of us was in the sort of visiting line or the reception line, and I loudly he talked to me and shook hands with me and said, "I want the deal," and it was heard by everybody. And whatever you may say, the U.S. president ranks, whether you like him or you hate him, that's a different matter. He is, you don't just take it for... Then we went and Steve Hadley and I and the team, we were working on this. We broke up at 3 a.m. with no deal. And it was...
Right, this is now 2006 we're talking about, the
2006,
separation plan.
2006, 2006, yeah. There was no deal. And
There were a lot of parts to this deal.
yeah. So we worked on it, then we went at 3 a.m. I didn't have the guts to wake up the Prime Minister at the time. Anyway, he probably wasn't asleep at that time. Early morning, like the vision of Condi Rice in 2005, Steve Hadley came to me and said, "I think we have worked it out." And actually, the president was in the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where receiving the Guard of Honor and all that. The point really is, I think to Shankar said a few minutes ago, two good men were determined that they would push through the deal. And all of us who were trying to work on the A's and the B's and the T's were ruled out when it came to the point. And I think India, by and large, also wanted the deal. I mean, as Shankar said, there might have been protests in Parliament, there might have been objections, but they were basically ideological. Everybody accepted that the deal would be good for India. But in Parliament, there was because it was a coalition government, the communist parties were opposed to it. They found it saying that, how dare you go along with the Americans, what the Americans want. There were those who felt that India's independence or independent foreign policy was being jeopardized and that we would become lackeys of the Americans and that kind of thing. So there were ideological reasons rather than everybody knew that the deal would be good for India. And the overweening presence was that of the US president and the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. They were together, so the rest of India had to fall in line.
Can I just ask one follow-up, and that is, when all of this domestic political opposition was happening in India, whether for political reasons or because they actually opposed the deal. What role did Sonia Gandhi play behind the scenes?
Mrs. Gandhi was for the deal. If Mrs. Gandhi was not for the deal, there was no deal. Because she was, in a sense, the eminence grise of the whole system. She was not. She never interfered in the deal. She never asked about what are the specific aspects of the deal. She accepted that the deal was good for India, and that was good for her. And I can't say with anything. She has a sneaking suspicion that President Bush was the best thing that had happened as far as India was concerned. And that, I mean, it was this, I mean, all of us who wrote lines and crossed lines and whatnot maybe, but it was this feeling that there were two good men trying to do something good for India, which I think drove the deal through.
Thank you. Let me now turn, and Shankar, do you want to add something on the Indian side? Let me now move to the US side, because it was really controversial here too. And Nick, you bear the scars, and Condi bears the scars of seeing pretty much every senator in the US Congress, every think tank. Tell us a little bit about what you both did to get it through.
Well, Condi will remember when we issued the joint statement in July 2005 that we aimed to turn the NPT on its head and work with India. There was terrific opposition. I received a call from several senior senators that afternoon saying that it would be hard for us to convince them that we were right. All of the newspapers against us, the think tanks, and there are lots of them, and a lot of really good people in Washington against us. And so Condi and I, Phil Zelikow and others, set out to just retail diplomacy, just try to convince people one by one. We went to every think tank, sat through hours of discussion and debate. Condi and I were recalling this morning, I think between us, we saw 75 senators. And I remember very distinctly going in to see Senator Hillary Clinton, and she had a long legal pad with a lot of detailed questions, and I tried to answer them. Senator Barack Obama, I think the key person on the Democratic side, and I'm not saying this just because I represent President Biden here in China, was Senator Joe Biden. He was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. He was an early backer, and he was able to convince many of the other Democratic and Republican senators that they ought to support this, that it was the right thing to do strategically for our relationship with India, but also to modernize how we thought about nonproliferation in the world and send a message to the bad actors like North Korea and Iran. So it was a painstaking effort. It took 3 years to do this and 2 votes in the Congress. And again, we wouldn't have achieved this if you didn't have a Secretary of State, if we had not had a Secretary of State who had this as one of her major priorities. And think of what she was facing between 2005 and 2008, the Iraq War, the surge in Iraq in 2006, the Afghan War, continued problems between Israelis and Palestinians. And she launched a major initiative in 2007 that got very close to an Israeli-Palestinian agreement. We were dealing, of course, with a recalcitrant Vladimir Putin by 2007 and 8. So she had her hands full, and yet she made this a priority, which is why I will always credit Condi for being the ultimate owner and author of this deal.
Do you want to add to that?
No, I'll just let that stand.
Good. I will just add that it, just like Condi, I think you said, and Governor Narayanan, you said, sometimes you have these moments of time and moments of opportunities, and you had people of goodwill leading both 2 countries, and you also had in the US Congress a totally different environment than now. So I was the staffer carrying Nick's bags for a lot of those meetings, and some of them were political and harsh, but a lot of them were trying to get to the right answer. Yeah. And I remember the first meeting we had with Senator Obama, Nick, and he just asked a lot of really substantive questions about nonproliferation, about clean energy. And, you know, the vote turned out something like 86-12. And I think you probably wouldn't get that now. You would get much more politics. Henry Hyde and Tom Lantos worked together on drafting.
And at the
Lugar and Biden.
At the very last minute, Senator Harry Reid.
That's right, Harry Reid.
Who found a way to bring this up to get it essentially by declaration, rather than having to go through complicated processes. So yes, there were a lot of heroes on both sides of the aisle in this. I do think, I mean, you'll speak to this, I think one thing that has been sustained across parties, across administrations, is the sense that this is a relationship that really is a good relationship for the United States and a good relationship for India, and that our strategic convergence is very, very strong. And the good news is I think most Americans and most Indians also believe that. So it's on a firm foundation, I would say.
Am I permitted a moment of levity?
Yes.
Yes.
No.
I mean, whether the story is apocryphal or otherwise, I don't know. But at one point, the president asked Steve Hadley, saying, "Do you think we are giving away too much to the Indians?" And Steve said, "No, sir, I think they're on course. But you know, sir, my counterpart has very powerful friends." So President Bush asked him, "Oh, Manmohan Singh, I'll deal with it." "No, sir, God." So he's a born-again Christian, I suppose he took that. He said, "Well, every time I'm trying to talk to my counterpart, he's in prayer with God." So I mean, he says, because I stop and say, "Hey, Steve, stop, I'm in communion with God. Give me 5 minutes, I'll come back."
That's great. Well, going from all of the negotiations and the moments that it nearly failed and how it was pushed through, I really want to turn to Ambassador Garcetti, who's been very patient. And could you just give us a broad sense of what's it like being ambassador to India now? And is there cooperation that's been unlocked that you can credit back to this deal?
Well, Anya, you said that this was an august and large panel. You all make it august. I make it large. It's amazing to listen and to be witness to this history, which I inherit. And all of us that work on the U.S.-India relationship get to see, to quote our current now External Affairs Minister in India, Jai Shankar, after the visit of Prime Minister Modi, not as a new peak, but as a new foundation. You know, we often in international relations talk about these moments as peaks, when in reality, sometimes they set the new floor. And that's really what this did. To answer your question directly, I think I have one of the best jobs, if not the best job in the world right now. Timing, the strategic importance, the rise of India, all kind of colliding together with a foundation where we don't have to build the closeness that we have. We can feel it. I feel every single day in terms of this legacy, certainly the relational legacy, which you see on the stage, but it's continued into our current national leaders, our current national security advisors, our current kind of counterparts in government, business, academia, et cetera. You feel it in the diplomatic legacy, which is that the US and India now work together incredibly closely on things that never make the headlines. Sometimes they do, like G20. India by itself couldn't have landed a unanimous G20 communique. The US certainly couldn't have on our own, given who's in the G20, but together we did. It was an extraordinary act of what I call not an additive relationship anymore of US plus India, but a multiplicative relationship, that when we get together, it's US times India. And I certainly feel the strategic legacy of this too, where people understood that this was a strategic calculation by two countries. Did the agreement create a closer relationship? Did a closer relationship create the agreement? Yes, both of them are true. I think the fourth thing, which we haven't gotten into, where it's still a little bit unfinished business, is the energy promise of the agreement, which in some ways was the core of at least the civil side of the nuclear deal, in which we now face a crisis that in 2000 we didn't feel as much as we do today, which is a climate crisis that defines kind of our Earth and our future, and the work that we need to do to work together on those climate solutions while strong. A piece of that promise, I think, is still the unfinished business. But there's no question this was the reset. And what makes this such an amazing job to have is during the state visit, Secretary Rice can speak to this more, but a good state visit might have 5, 10 deliverables. We had 173 deliverables from space to cultural exchange, to things that were unthinkable in the strategic relationship, lending our most exquisite fighter engine technology to India, which we haven't even shared with some of our closest allies, MQ-9 drones, which Vivek here sells for a living. You have things that if you don't look down and realize how far we've come up the mountain and only look at the peak because we still have places to go, you wouldn't realize just how foundational this agreement was.
That's really great. Thank you. I now want to dig into some of the issues you raised a little bit more specifically, and you read my mind, because energy, of course, Alyssa and I wrote a lot of talking points saying India is going to have 25,000 megawatts of nuclear energy by 2025, or at least by 2030. And of course, I think they're at a little bit more than 7,000 megawatts. So I don't know if you want to take that on, Ambassador Garcetti, or if someone else wants to talk about why the specific energy promise of the deal hasn't quite come to fruition.
Speak to that. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing on which India and the US can say the governments of the government of India, the government of the United States are not responsible. I think that just as the accident led to the transformation of the relationship, extraneous events led to the promise not being fulfilled. I think soon after the deal was signed, the judgment in what was probably the biggest gas tragedy, the Bhopal gas tragedy that we had, that was in 1964, I think, 1984, gas tragedy, the judgment was passed by the Supreme Court. And the obiter dicta in the judgment was that much of the failure or the liability should be on the supplier of technical equipment of this kind. That immediately put a spoke in the wheel of all those who were hoping to win. Two, I think within a few months, I think by the time Shankar had taken over, the Fukushima tragedy took place. Indian parliamentarians in India took this and said that almost the entire liability should be taken by the manufacturers of nuclear equipment. So Westinghouse and other companies naturally had to step back, and the compensation that had to pay became enormous. Where we had, for instance, the French government backed their own companies, whereas the American companies were on their own. So this made a lot of difference. But even there, the French and other companies did not. So it was a set of circumstances which are totally unrelated to the deal, extraneous to the deal, I would say, which led to the promise that was held out. And I think it was the Indian government which felt this most that we couldn't fulfill. Actually, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh felt that he had let down President Bush. But frankly, there is nothing that could be done. Indian Parliament was quite anxious that they should not be held responsible for any tragedy of this kind.
Right.
May I add to that?
Please.
If you broaden the lens a bit, strictly speaking, yes, nuclear business didn't grow the way we expected it to. But if you look at energy as a whole, renewables, for instance, and at the other things we're doing in energy, it's actually quite remarkable. And that was unlocked because of the deal. Mm-hmm. And without the deal, I don't think we'd be in a position, and Ambassador Garcetti can probably speak to this, about what we're actually doing, especially in other renewables. Mm-hmm. And trying actually to make sure that we, friends, partners, do this independently and try and diversify our sources of supply and so on. And that's across the whole field of energy. So I still think the deal served a purpose even for energy.
That's great, thank you. And I just want to dig one level deeper, and I don't know if Ambassador Mulford or Ambassador Garcetti want to go into this, but is there now a possible workaround to the nuclear liability issues that's being worked on?
Okay. Do you want to?
Well, that's an issue for India to work out, because to put the nuclear liability on the shoulders of suppliers in a world economy of free movement of capital is unlikely to be the way to get investment in civil nuclear. So I do think the initiative has to lie there. because it was at the time of the deal, there were nuclear parks set aside, which U.S. companies were pushing to get to as quickly as they could, and they were pushing me for years to get this deal finished. And when that judgment was made on liability, they retired from the scene, largely. The Russians didn't. But that is something that, if you go back to the course of the deal itself, one of the points that India's people made to us constantly was that India did not want to arrive at the high economic table and be the world's biggest polluter. But the inability to solve this problem has meant that pollution is rising in India. And this is something that really, in my opinion, has to be addressed as a political issue by both of us. But the initiative has to be very strongly on the Indian side on this one.
Yeah, I would say that, of course, there's always a solution. We work and are working on that solution. We're two democracies in the midst of two elections, and it will have to come, I believe, after that, because obviously these are legislative solutions. But I've also witnessed within the Oval Office and the cabinet room this being raised by this president, who also is probably the first president who's ever said, you know, this is the most consequential relationship in the world, something that builds on the legacy of what President Bush did and others. But because Joe Biden, I think, had that perspective, you know, it's Joe Biden when he's trying to convince me to become ambassador, he said, this is the most important country in the world to me. I figure he says that to the Liechtenstein nominee too. But it's, I've heard him repeat it privately to Prime Minister Modi, and he really gets how important this piece is. And I do think that when you look at India, you know, you hear the tale of two countries. Oh, this didn't happen. It's got the slowest net zero goal. It's not going quickly enough. I've witnessed actually exactly what you said, a real miracle of the pace of acceleration of renewables, the strongest of India in the world right now. It's about 40% of capacity, only about 25% of generation because of some issues, but those are solvable issues, engineering issues. 40%. And you know, the largest energy project in human history is a solar field being built in Gujarat as we speak, in human history. But the steady state electricity that will bridge this, if we don't bring nuclear on, there's very few other options. And you look at the renewables growing, but the amount of coal that will be added to the Indian air and that will be added to the world carbon emissions is equal to the fourth largest coal user in the world's total coal use in Germany. So Germany could move 100% away from coal as India adds all these record renewables, and you'll still see no net gain in our fight if we don't figure this out. So I think there's a real incentive for both sides. This is not about helping American companies make a buck in India. This is because they're quite busy, by the way. Nuclear companies are very busy in Eastern Europe who are getting away from Russian nuclear power and looking at American companies. But the other thing that's changed is it's not just the big boys and girls anymore. It's the SMRs, the small modular reactors that are on the brink of technological breakthroughs that really could come, by the way, as easily from India to the United States. So think about this now, transform what liability means in both directions. And I think there's an elegant solution that we might be able to come to that I know is a priority for the president. I know it's a priority for Indians. There's a lot of history in the Bhopal piece, which, depending which party, if you look at your history, who beat up whom, is the other party going to beat them up on this? But I think, depending on kind of people's comfort post-election in India, we've done some very good, quiet work that, you know, it isn't Chatham House, and I won't say anything more, but I think if people want to get to yes, they can get to yes and get that last piece sewn up, which will really help India go in this growth of the middle class, the expansion of its energy needs, but also not have to rely on a huge expansion of coal.
If I could just, I have to do a little bit of a commercial here, which is I see Dean Jandar back there, who's the Dean of the Door School. And the Door School, along with Hoover and some others, we're doing quite a lot of work with India we were together in New Delhi a year ago, February, to talk about issues of energy, about the energy transition that needs to take place. And I think that's just one of many, many efforts between universities here and universities in India, the private sector here and the private sector in India. So quite apart from what the governments are doing, I think there's really a lot of energy, to coin a phrase, behind the idea that this is a transition that needs to be made and that we can find a lot of means of cooperation to do it. And Arun, who is, of course, the dean of the New Door School, has been our leader in that work.
That's great. And just to underline that, I happened to be at an event with Secretary Kerry last night, who waxed lyrical about the India civilian nuclear deal and how it's unlocking all of this kind of cooperation.
Yeah.
So it's bipartisan.
I do just have to say one thing, sometimes we don't realize how technologically sophisticated other countries are. So just a little story, we were in Delhi, and the Indians were showing us how their biometric ID had been a way of dealing with COVID. So if you go and it's not time, your biometric ID would say, no, your shot is in 2 weeks. And this biometric ID for all Indians is really an extraordinary thing. So I took out my tattered little vaccine card, and I said, here's how a really sophisticated country deals with COVID. And so we should realize that the technological capability goes both ways, and that there's a lot that we can do with India that India can teach us as well.
That's so true. Great place to start. Let me zoom out a little bit to the regional dynamics. And I think broader U.S. foreign policy towards Asia, especially vis-a-vis China, always was a sotto voce under the deal, but it wasn't very explicit. Now, there's huge expertise here dealing with China, from Condi to Shankar, who was ambassador, to Nick, who's ambassador now. In retrospect, it's kind of stunning that China didn't stand in the way of this deal in the nuclear suppliers group. Probably not something that would happen now. Tell us how you think, and anyone can chime in here, how you think the deal impacted India-China relations, US-China relations, and has it made the world safer in that sense?
Let me tell you a China story.
Yeah.
When we were going to the NSG, I went to Peking in August 2008, before the NSG meeting. And Wang Yi said to me, China will not be the one to stand in your way. So I went home, and everybody's thrilled, Oh, wonderful, the Chinese are not going to oppose, Chinese will support. I said, no, they never said they'd support. They only said they wouldn't be the one to stand in your way. As long as there's anybody else, and they'll put everybody else up to it, they're going to stand in your way. And so everybody calmed down in Delhi, and that's exactly what happened. On the 6th of September, the day at 6 o'clock in the morning in our Vienna hotel, we get a letter from the Chinese saying, we are so happy to tell you that we are going to support you because of the traditional friendship between our two countries and so on. But that was because, thanks to what you had done, Secretary Rice and others, everybody else had been neutralized.
Well, and that's exactly what happened at G20. When I talk about the legacy, China, in all the lead-ups, was not quite a chaos maker, but was resisting at the health ministerial, at economic and finance ministerials, a lot of different things. But once India spoke with Russia and got non-opposition, China didn't want to be the only one that was out there. And Nick can speak much more to this, but it is an effective way, if the US can help lift sometimes and India can lift other times, to get the deck cleared. China will oppose if they have one other person sometimes, but without anybody else, they won't be the one outlier.
Mm-hmm. That's a very good point.
Yeah, I would just add that it was a multidimensional chess actually, because I think you had communicated to us this conversation, and I will say it was a different relationship with China at the time, different relationship, and that has to be said. And there were a number of things that Hu Jintao was actually very helpful on. For instance, the North Korean nuclear deal, nuclear problem. But the reason I say it's multidimensional chess is that you just have to figure out how to let China be the last one standing, and at that point they would. And so the big problem was actually not China. And by the way, the Russians just wanted their commercial interest. They were totally craven about it. This would be good for Russians selling nuclear reactors in India. And Vladimir Putin made no bones about it. He said that's what he wanted.
Kudankulam 3 and 4 were coming on screen.
Exactly, and that's all he wanted. But with the really big problem were these small countries that believed that they were the guardians of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Austria. I got lucky. The foreign minister of Norway was somebody to whom we were very close, and he helped to organize those countries and to get their agreement, although we did have to chase down the Austrian foreign minister on vacation someplace in the south of France to get it done. But it was really making sure that you could eliminate all sources of opposition, and then China would not want to be in opposition.
Last man standing.
Yeah, last man standing, right.
Anya, I would just add that, this negotiation between the US and India was 3 years, 3 separate agreements, the joint statement of 2005, the separation of the military and civil nuclear facilities of India in 2006, the final American votes in the Congress in 2007, and then the Nuclear Suppliers Group in 2008. So a long, long negotiation. This was not happening in isolation from, as Condi said, the 6 party talks, where the Chinese had been, frankly, quite helpful at that time to the United States, and the Iran nuclear talks, where China and Russia supported the United States and the 3 European countries in sanctioning the Iranians 4 times in those years, Chapter 7 resolutions, because the Iranians were seeking a nuclear weapons program. So we kept, I remember talking to Shankar about this, we both kept the Chinese apprised of what we were doing, because out there we felt that China was a potential spoiler, but it turned out not to be, because we had a better relationship strategically. It wasn't perfect by any means with China at that time. What I think now, sitting where I am in Beijing in 2024, I think the civil nuclear deal has strengthened the American position in the Indo-Pacific, because India, while not an ally, is one of our very strongest partners in the world. If you think about our air and naval partnerships, our economic partnerships in the Quad. And if you look at Chinese behavior since then, it's so different in 2024 than 2005, 6, 7, and 8. China, a major problem along its Himalayan border with India. And of course, we're very supportive of India. China bullying the Philippines at second time as shoal, bullying Vietnam, trying to bully the Japanese in the Senkaku Islands. And so what we've seen out here in the last couple of years is a major strengthening of the American strategic position vis-a-vis China, with the buildup of our alliances with Japan, with South Korea, with the Philippines, with Thailand, with Australia, the Quad and AUKUS. It's been quite an interesting couple of years. And I don't think the civil nuclear deal, I'm quite sure it wouldn't be possible, something like it these days, because global politics has changed so much, and Russia and China simply aren't, they have a different view of how the world should be organized, very, very different than our own. So I think we're all the recipients of the strength of that civil nuclear deal here in 2024.
That's great, thank you. And during 2006, 2007, there were feelers out about a Quad, Japan, Australia, the US, and India. And I think a lot of people on the US and Indian side thought that would be too aggressive vis-a-vis China. Boy, has everyone changed their tune. Any more comments on China or the regional dynamics? No. Let me just move on then to the final topic, and then I want to open it to questions for everyone. A really enormous amount of cooperation was unlocked in the defense sector and the intelligence sector between the United States and India. So maybe, Shankar, I'll start with you. Can you say a little bit more about that and how you think we're dealing with each other fundamentally differently now?
Well, I think there were 3 things at that particular time which helped. One was de-hyphenization of US relations with Pakistan and India. And that was the key in many ways. I was in Pakistan in 2005, 2006, when you were actually doing the groundwork for the deal. And suddenly the Pakistanis were most cooperative. So, I mean, for us, this was good. But I think it really mattered. It also meant that Pakistan started dealing with the issues in Pakistan-US relations in a different way, just as we were enabled to do that in the civil nuclear deal. The second thing that for me was important, at least in the dynamics, was that, Mumbai happened soon after, November that year, just after we'd actually done the deal, ratified it, and so on. And there was absolutely no resistance at all to the idea that the FBI would come in the next day, because Americans had been involved, that we'd cooperate. In fact, the Indian system was open to working with the US in ways that just 6 months before that would have been much more sensitive. So in a sense, counterterrorism, I think, was the basis. Dehyphenization helped. But I think it was a combination of things. In this case, the combination of events actually helped to develop that relationship. But more important for me was the fact that once you got an idea of strategic congruence, then you had an interest. You knew also what you could share, what you needed to talk about, what you didn't know. And there we did find complementarity in many ways, which led to what you see today, a much, much closer relationship.
Thank you. Ambassador Garcetti, you want to weigh in?
Sure. I would add to that we have right now this deepening military, strategic, and technological work together. It's something that we see now as the #1 military exercise partner with India, which I think if you woke up an Indian general from 30 years ago, they would be shocked to hear. It's worked with our intelligence agencies. It's in times of need. It's helping build capacity. It's worked together in space. It's co-production, co-development of future weaponry. It's also, we have something called Indus X, which is bringing startups in the defense space together in both countries to solve common challenges and problems in the world as warfare changes so dramatically in the years ahead and even as we witness today. And then in the technology space, 2 national security advisors, one of the US and one of India, came together a little over a year ago to put together the initiative on critical emerging technologies, 6G telecoms, semiconductors, space and defense, AI, and quantum. Sometimes biotech gets in there, sometimes we get climate tech in there. But those 5 technologies that will really define our lifetimes, 2 democracies looking at it with different values than autocracies, who too often have a model of technology that will divide us and misinform us and potentially harm us. But instead, we can have a vision of technology that connects us and protects us, detects for us disease, uses AI to cough into a phone and figure out whether you have tuberculosis. I mean, there's an area now that's strategic but also technological that I think, again, this multiplicative relationship, US and India have a lot of computing power and human power together. And while again, we can find that narcissism of small differences between any democracies, and democracies will always disappoint each other more than, in some ways, autocracies, because our expectations, as they should be, are higher. It really is so different. I was talking to National Security Advisor Doval, and he said, it's not just that we strategically believe in each other. It's not that we just like each other. We're in an ideological battle in the world right now between extremism, whether that's political extremism, whether it's religious extremism, and democracies. Let us not just fight with each other about where we don't look at each other exactly eye to eye, and instead work on what that common enemy to humanity and freedom looks like.
Thank you. That's great. Yes, David.
I wanted to mention that there was one very important event in the intelligence cooperation field, because when I was serving in India, there was a reluctance on the part of India to engage in what intelligence operational matters, as opposed to just sharing intelligence, which we did do. And this happened just after the civil nuclear agreement was signed, and that was the attack in Mumbai on the hotels. And that brought immediate cooperation between the United States and India. The FBI sent a forensic team there virtually overnight. Remarkably, they were received at the Mumbai airport, processed in 30 minutes. That's unusual in itself. And they had highly sophisticated equipment that they were going to use in working with the Mumbai police department. This was also cleared in probably an hour. Again, a remarkable demonstration of cooperative attitudes that flowed from these earlier events. And it led to a very, very significant examination and research into this question of the attack on Mumbai hotels. I don't need to give you all the detail on that, but it opened a lot of new windows and created a new area of close cooperation and confidence between the United States and India. I think it's important to keep in mind that the business of changing relationships is a very broad-based and time-consuming thing. For example, when I was in India, we had the experience of suddenly becoming the flavor of the month to virtually, it seemed, everybody in the world, universities and governments and members of Congress and so on. And we had, in my time there, 60 congressional delegations, one of which was led by Mr. Biden. And this came at the time of the run-up to the final decisions in civil nuclear. And most of these members of Congress, all of whom we briefed at the embassy, were remarkable because they had been members of Congress for many years, but they had never visited India. So when you get off an airplane in India and you see the real India, and you begin to understand what you're looking at and how it's working and so on, it's a major eye-opener to those people. And this, I'm sure, helped change attitudes and has brought about the modern situation, which is Americans better understand India, and they are more sensitive to the value of India and our relationship with India. And here at Hoover, we are doing things to make the American public more knowledgeable, because these are our friends. We've done things together. It's vital. They're one of the biggest countries in the world, and they have tremendous expertise and commitment. So there's really a sort of undercurrent going on all these years together, which is still going on and building, and it is the single most important thing to our security in the world.
Thank you. Atul bears the scars from all those 60 congressional delegations. We are amazingly nearly out of time in an hour-and-a-half panel. We've covered 3 decades and an enormous amount of subject matter. I want to open it up to maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, if anyone has any.
Hi, my name's Raina, and I'm a student here at Stanford. I'm studying bioengineering and international relations. I'm from Mumbai. Grew up with the background of the 26/11 attacks, etc. My question for you is about kind of part of current events that we haven't really touched on in this conversation, and that's the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And you mentioned in the G20 communique that it was helpful to have India be able to work with Russia on that, but when the invasion happened, there was a lot of criticism of India for not condemning Russia. So my question is, how do India and the US navigate these kind of disagreements with certain states when it comes to their foreign policies with other states?
Great question.
Well, maybe I'll give a start. And
Please.
yes.
Happy to defer all.
Yes, right. Look, I am fundamentally of a belief that the world needs to unite behind the Ukrainians for what the Russians have done. Let me just state that. Sometimes it is better not to have loyalty tests on every issue. And when you look at what we are doing with India in the Indo-Pacific, which is our other big front, I think that giving time for India to come to its own determination about its relationship with Russia is probably wise. Now, what do I mean by that? As India deepens its defense relationship with the United States, I am confident, I won't ask my Indian counterparts, but I am confident that the value of a defense relationship with the United States, as opposed to a relationship with the junk that is called Russian military equipment, will come to dawn on our India counterparts, and that they will be very much more interested in the relationship with the United States. And I believe that our strategic interests are converging more and more every day for a whole variety of reasons. And eventually, the fact that Mr. Putin and Xi Jinping have decided that they are in a friendship without limits will also convince our Indian counterparts that their strategic future rests with the United States, not with Russia.
Thank you. We'll take one more question right
You can.
No, that
You wanna
was
wait?
exactly what I was going to say, I swear.
You just have to be more diplomatic because you're in office. Yeah.
But EK wants to say something.
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
it's not, I don't think there should be a zero-sum game. There's been a long history of relationship between India and Russia. And so there are several times in Indian modern history, I would say, when Russia has been friendly to us. Even in 1968, sorry, when was it? 1962, the Russians did not wholeheartedly support China, though Mao was very keen. Then the most classic example is 1971, when we had just done the Indo-Soviet treaty, and we saw the Seventh Fleet steaming up the Bay of Bengal. So what I'm saying is that, and I agree with God, you don't take one incident or one event and determine the nature of the relationship. Historically, there are periods when you need a country to support you. I don't think anybody in India supports the fact that what Putin did in Ukraine is the right thing. But whether we are willing to condemn this person, I mean, to some extent, it's like relationship with your own children. I mean, there are times when people do wrong things, and you may criticize them, you don't condemn. So I don't think we should judge the content or the nature of the relationship. A few minutes ago, we were talking about it. Today, our intelligence relationship, of which I can do because I was head of intelligence in India, is almost like the five eyes.
Exactly.
You know, kind of, and those of us who were in the earlier days, we never saw anything of it. So there are lots of pluses and minuses. And as one of the younger members of this audience, please realize that there's no absolutes. This is right and that is wrong. How do we play it and how do we deal with these matters are matters that the long-term relationship. Iran, for instance, I mean, you can condemn Iran, but we have a huge Shia population in India. When Ayatollah Khomeini took charge, his first telephone call was to Lucknow, where there's a huge, what you call the Stanford of the theology, Shia theology is located there. So, you dare not go against Iran in the manner that you would rather, because it has a tremendous impact on the huge Shia population. So I just want you to say that it's not that you have to publicly declaim what you're up to. There are reasons both of state and of civilizations which you have to deal with in this matter.
Thank you so much for the panel, and loved hearing your candid perspectives. I'm Anvit. I'm a graduate student here. And my question was sort of around, we know there's a strong chance that Modi comes to power in India. So based on your perspectives and your experience, do you think which kind of presidency would a Modi-Trump presidency versus a Modi-Biden presidency be better for, future relationships on energy, defense, and intelligence? And would also like to hear your reasons why.
Great. Well, it's a good question.
Since I have no dog in this fight, is that the right? Look, I think what we have demonstrated here, and we didn't go back to the beginning of the Bush administration when there was actually a BJP government in India under Prime Minister Vajpayee. And that's when we created the next steps in strategic partnership. And so you had, even there, a kind of bipartisan sense that this was the right way to go. And then, of course, Prime Minister Singh's extraordinary leadership. This relationship has gotten stronger with each successive American presidency. And I think that whoever is elected in India, whoever is elected in the United States, we have such now a firm foundation of strategic alignment that it may sound different from time to time, but I'm enough of a political scientist still to believe that countries do ultimately follow their interests, and our interests are very much aligned. Our values are also aligned. If you have the notion that you're a democracy and you have a long history of that, but most importantly, as I said, our convergence of interests is just unassailable at this point. And so I expect this to be bipartisan, whoever wins.
Thank you. Nick, do you have any closing comments on any subject?
Anya, I'd just say this. Foreign policy is obviously most often about a country's interests. And we assessed our interests correctly, I think, back then as we do now in terms of the relationship with India. But there are some times when, in addition to interests coinciding, you can form relationships of trust between people. And I certainly feel that that's been a great byproduct, and this panel is a good representative of it with India. When I was teaching at Harvard after my time in government, Shankar came 3 times to Harvard, and he and I were together there. And I obviously benefited now with hindsight with all of his knowledge about China, because he's such really India's greatest expert on China. Sham Saran is another person. And I wanted to credit David Mulford for bringing us together, Ambassador Mulford, first of all, for being so active at Hoover to establish a center on India. There are very few in the United States. We need more centers on India, and David has done it. And so sometimes you can build trust. And I think if you're looking at the US-India relationship, that might be the most important byproduct of this agreement that has transcended now a generation or half a generation of American diplomats. I thought I'd offer that, and thank you very much for including me today.
Thank you. That's a perfect note to. That is a perfect note to end on, and I just want to tell all the students in the room, many of whom contact us who teach here about becoming diplomats, please do it. It is a noble profession. It is very rare, I have to tell you, to have a moment like the India civilian nuclear deal where you have presidential and prime minister level attention and you're doing something positive. Normally it's the problem children in international diplomacy that get all the attention. This was unusual in that it was positive and transformational. And please all join me in a round of applause for these amazing diplomats here on stage.